Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar addressing homelessness, permanent supportive housing, and housing first for people with SMI and CODs. This is the second event in the PATH Effective Outreach and Engagement Services series. My name is Zach Stewart and I'm going to be your producer for today's event. And I'm just going to run through a couple quick housekeeping slides before we get started. This event is being recorded and audio is now broadcasting, so you should be hearing my voice. We are providing audio via the computer today, and we also have a phone as backup if you can't connect via the computer audio. We strongly encourage you to use the computer audio if possible, and just choose only one audio source. So if you're hearing my voice through both the phone and your computer, you can hang up the phone. The views, opinions, and content expressed in this presentation and discussion do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policies of the Center for Mental Health Services or the Center for Substance Abuse Treatment, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. We do have live captioning for today's event. You can click the link on the screen to access those captions, and we've also provided the link in the All Questions box, which is located right beneath the slides. So you just click that link, and then the captions will open in a new window or tab on your screen, which you can position anywhere you like, and you can change the size, color, and speed of those captions. Your line is going to be muted for today's presentation, but we have several ways where you can communicate with us. That first one is going to be the public chat box, which you can see to the right of the slides, right underneath my picture. I see many of you have already found that and have been posting in there. If you just want to let us know where you're calling in from today, that would be great. We also have that All Questions box I mentioned, which is going to be located right beneath the slides. You can just type your content or tech questions into that box throughout the presentation, and we will answer your tech questions right in that box, and then we're going to save your content questions for the Q&A, which is going to be right after the main presentations today.
Yeah.
You just type your questions in the bar on the bottom, and then you hit enter on your enter key. And we also have a downloads material box located to the bottom left of your screen underneath the slides. In there is going to be today's slide deck. You can just click on where it says today's slide deck and then select the download files button at the bottom of that pod to download that. So now I'm going to pass things over to our moderator today, Sherry Downing, the Deputy Director of HHRN. Sherry, are you with us?
I am. Thank you, Zach. Well, welcome, everyone. We are so delighted that you're here today. This is going to be a spectacular webinar, I think. We've got great presenters for you, and it's an important topic. But first, I would like to introduce you to Doreen Gross, who is our new PATH Program Coordinator in SAMHSA's Division of State and Community Systems Development. Doreen Gross served as the Contracting Officer Representative, or the CORE, on a homeless and housing resource network immediately before stepping in as the new PATH coordinator. You are all well aware of HHRN, I think. Certainly you are if you're here at this webinar. So Ms. Gross has more than 20 years of experience working with grants and contracts associated with people who are at risk of or experiencing homelessness. And she's worked with lots of the federal partners, including United States Interagency Council on Homelessness, Department of Housing and Urban Development, Administration for Children, Youth, and Families, and many others to coordinate services, policies, housing, and homelessness-related activities. She has a master's degree in social work from the University of Maryland, and we are delighted to welcome her. So Doreen, with that, I'm going to hand it to you to do a welcome for SAMHSA.
Okay, thank you so much, Sherry. And I would just like to start by saying good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of SAMHSA, I want to welcome you all to today's webinar on permanent supportive housing and housing first for people who have serious mental illness or co-occurring disorders. We are delighted that you all can join us. As you know, permanent supportive housing and housing first are often thought of as two complementary tools for ending chronic homelessness and helping people with disabilities live independently in the community. Permanent supportive housing is a successful and proven programmatic and housing intervention. While Housing First is a framework that can and should be used with permanent supportive housing, as well as in other program models and as a community-wide framework for ending homelessness. In fact, many supportive housing programs use a Housing First approach, provides rapid access to housing with minimal precautions to serve people experiencing homelessness. This webinar today will provide an overview of permanent supportive housing models and the practice of Housing First as a means to ending homelessness for people with serious mental illness and or co-occurring disorder. So today we have two presenters who will be sharing some valuable information on permanent supportive housing and Housing First. And I will turn it over to Sherry at this point so she can, our moderator, so she can introduce our presenters. And again, thank you all for joining this webinar. Sherry?
Thank you, Dor. Thanks, Doreen. Much appreciated. We're happy to have you here. So I am going to introduce our two speakers and then hand it over to them. So first we have my good and dear friend, Pat Tucker, who is a very experienced trainer, technical assistance provider, and she is nationally recognized for her efforts in supportive housing, supported employment, and community integration for people who have disabilities, including those who have serious mental illnesses and co-occurring disorders. In her role as one of Advocates for Human Potential Senior Program Managers, she offers technical assistance and training to providers throughout the country in a number of evidence-based practices, but supported employment, permanent supportive housing, harm reduction, case management, and motivational interviewing. And she has also conducted fidelity assessments of programs that provide both supported employment and permanent supportive housing. So she is really excellent at this. And I think you'll agree with me once you've heard her speak. We also welcome Sean Frankenstein, who is currently the housing coordinator at Service Access and Management, Inc. in Pottsville, Pennsylvania. He's a 2006 graduate of King's College with majors in criminal justice and sociology, and he's worked in the behavioral health field since the fall of 2006. He began his career with SAM, Services Access and Management, Inc., in May 2008 as a mental health blended case manager, and he held that position for 5 years and then was hired in SAM's housing department in April 13, where he worked for the past 6 years. The housing department oversees 6 programs that assist people who have a mental health diagnosis and those who are facing or are currently experiencing homelessness. His goal is to assist those facing or experiencing homelessness with finding permanent housing and to make their homelessness experience as brief as possible. Absolutely a worthy goal that we all, I think, share. So welcome to both of you. And with that, I am going to give you a little overview of today's agenda. So Pat will speak first about housing models, and then Sean will speak to us about his program. We'll have questions and answers, and closing, please feel free to type your questions in the all question box. We sometimes will miss them if they go into the public chat. With that, our learning objectives are that at the end of this, we really hope that you're going to be able to identify different types of housing models and the benefits of each, and understand how one community implemented some really great housing innovation. With that, I'm handing it over to you, Pat. Come on in.
Thank you very much, Sherry and Doreen, for those great words and great oversight or sight. Hi, everybody. I'm Pat Tucker, and I'm going to start off talking about housing models. And I'm excited to be here. And so good morning to some of you and good afternoon to the rest, because I see people from all over the country. So housing models. So I wanted to give a little bit of information on all of the different types of housing. Well, I don't have all of them, because that would require me to be on the phone for a long time, and nobody wants to hear that. So some of the housing types that are more common are temporary housing models. Now, in the temporary housing models, a lot of those are for short-term emergencies, or maybe it's situational homelessness, which the situational homelessness is you lost your job, and because you lost your job, you lost your housing. And so most of those would be maybe with quick or rapid rehousing. So you're not going to see temporary housing used for everything, but it's also one of the things that if there's a domestic violence situation and somebody needs to get out of their home immediately, they can go into temporary housing. Temporary housing has a time frame put on it, and I've seen temporary housing be 15 days, 30 days, 2 months, 6 months. It really can vary depending on the type of program it is, but it is not meant to be permanent housing. It's really to provide a place for people to be while they're trying to get to permanent housing. Emergency shelters, I think everybody knows about emergency shelters. There are lots of different types of shelters, and some of those shelters have their own rules that go with it. And some shelters are for men only, some are for women, some are for families, some are for victims of domestic violence. I've also seen shelters for people with LGBTQ, and also shelters for youth. So there are tons of shelters out there. Not all of them are necessarily accessible, and in rural communities and in smaller communities, the number of shelters is probably limited. Some are done by churches as well, but it really does matter where you're at as to how many shelters are available to you. There's transitional housing. Transitional housing can go up to 24 months, and it's in a supervised setting, and there's also social services provided to people to help them work on some skill sets that they might want to work on. It could be looking for a job. It could be working on trying to get your kids back. It could be, people need this housing because they're working on some issues, and there's a plan being made so when they exit the program, they can move into some place that's permanent. So that's transitional housing. It's a little bit different than, permanent housing because it's a time limit. Permanent housing doesn't have a time limit. There's medical respite programs. These programs are for people who are experiencing homelessness, but they're too sick to go back into apartments. They need medical care. And so we basically are putting them in these medical respite programs so they can get the care that they need, because it's hard to get the care that you need when you're homeless. A lot of people need to take medication on a regular basis, or they need to refrigerate their medication, or, there might be side effects of the medication. And so in some of those instances, you want to make sure that you are paying attention to their medical needs. I saw a question and I wanted to try to jump on it. Somebody asked me, and I knew this was going to come up, so thank you, Joan, for asking. So transitional housing is similar to temporary housing. They're very similar, except the transitional housing usually has a longer span that you can stay in it than the temporary housing. The temporary housing is shorter term. So hopefully that helps to clear up the differences. So I wanted to jump in because we hear housing first a lot. And it can be different in how you use housing first. Some people think of housing first as certain programs that basically consider themselves mainly housing people first, like there's the Pathways Housing First program. They basically house people quickly, and their job is to, that's what they do. So it's, housing first is quickly and successfully connecting people to housing. We're trying to eliminate barriers and any preconditions or any of that thing. So somebody doesn't have to be clean and sober to go into housing. Somebody doesn't have to be taking their medications for their mental health issue to get into the housing. So Housing First tries to eliminate all of those barriers that sometimes are put up because we think that's what people need to do to maintain their housing. There are also supportive services offered to people in Housing First. So those services should be on helping people become stable in their housing and also preventing them from going back to being homeless. And it really should be about what the person wants and what they're working on, and not what we think they should be working on. And that's a real key in Housing First, is the consumer or the person we're working with gets to drive the bus. And we're on the bus, we're helping, we're kind of like GPS, we're giving information, we're letting them know about different programs, and letting them make the decision of where they want to turn at. In the past, and I'm old enough that I was working in the past, and we thought we knew what would make people successful in housing. So we looked at a lot of things. We thought, okay, if people weren't taking drugs, it would be if they would be able to live in housing. We also looked at whether or not people were taking their medications. That would be a way that we thought you were going to be able to maintain housing. What we found out is we didn't know what would help people be successful in housing. Nothing was proven through research that was done. So now we're in the present where we know that if people are getting into housing, they're less likely to end up back on the street if we provide the services that they need, if we use some harm reduction in the housing, and also if we do motivational interviewing. We also put plans in place to help people deal with issues before they get to evictions. So we have to also make relationships with landlords if there's somebody else who owns the building other than our agency. So the principles of Housing First is the housing has to be safe and affordable. We know that all people can achieve housing stability and permanent housing, and their supports are going to be different. I'm not going to get the same support that maybe a Brian gets or a Jamie gets. Maybe we have different issues. We could all have the same issues, but we have different goals that we want to work on. One of the things you have to believe in the housing first is that everyone is housing ready. We don't know what makes people housing ready, so we have to assume everybody is. And we know that housing can improve people's lives. One of the things we see is people going into housing have physical health issues pop up. That's because they haven't dealt with physical health on an ongoing basis in a preventive way. They've only dealt with physical health in a reactive way when it becomes an emergency. We know that mental health can improve if you have housing. People can start to pay attention to that and not, be worried about where they're sleeping at night. We also can help people start to think about employment and start to work. And I have to think that employment is going to be an option for a lot of people. Not everybody, but a lot of people. Employment might be the way to get housing. We also believe that people have a right to determination, dignity, and respect. We have to make sure that we're respecting people. We're respecting their choices. We don't know what's best for somebody else. They can only know that. And we also know that people may make mistakes, but we have to allow people to make mistakes. The housing and the services are based on the person's needs and preferences, which means that the staff in Housing First or permanent supportive housing has to be flexible, it can't be a one-size-fits-all, because if you're like me, you're a big woman, I know one size does not fit all. One size fits some, but not all. So we have to make sure our services are not just everybody gets to focus on, the same things at the same time, and everybody has to go to these groups, and it really has nothing to do with what the person wants. It has to do with us trying to make sure we get people what we think they need. Some of the core components of Housing First is low barrier admission policies. That goes with, we don't know what's going to make somebody successful, so entry should be if they meet the criteria of your programs and they want housing. The other thing we know is we want to get people into housing as quickly as possible. So we are looking at rapid and streamlined entry into housing. The services are voluntary. So that means that people don't have to get services. So that puts some pressure on the staff to be creative in providing services that people want, or services in a way that people can, feel like it's going to benefit them. People have full rights, responsibility, and legal protections. Your housing is your housing. So people can sign a lease and not have to worry about, I'm going to lose my housing if I don't work with services. We also have to be in the habit of trying to prevent people from losing their housing and getting evicted. So we need to have relationships with property managers and be in constant communication so we know when something's going, when it's going south, and we can jump in to try to help correct it, or if somebody is really not doing well, looking at other options so that we can help people to be in the best place for them that will work for them. Oops, I think I went a little too fast there. Rapid rehousing is helping someone to get housed as quickly as possible. So if somebody loses their housing, what we know is that the longer you've been homeless, the harder it is to get back on your feet. So the rapid rehousing is saying when somebody's housed and they lose their housing, it's not only better for them to get back into housing as quickly as possible, it's also cheaper. It also reduces some of the trauma because we know that being homeless causes trauma. So if we can reduce that trauma, that would be great by getting people in as quickly as possible. And most of the rapid rehousing is housing first. And it's a great solution for people who are not chronically homeless. So housing first really works well for that population as well. And it's based on trying to get people to rent apartments, to get a place, and getting them, the goal is get them in as quickly as possible. There's temporary community support that's provided with people, and that could also include case management, and that may be to help people get situated again. It also may be to help the families or the person take a look at what happened the last time and maybe some ways to prevent becoming homeless again. And there's time-limited financial assistance to get them back in their housing. And it's time-limited because doing rapid rehousing doesn't mean that we're going to get in there and try to provide services long-term. Our goal is to get people back in their housing or some housing, get them situated, get them services that they need or connect them with services that they need, and then move to the next person. And I'm going to stop there, and I think we're going to move on. So, Sean, you there?
I'm here. Thank you very much, Pat. Hello, everyone. My name is Sean Frankenstein. I'm the Housing Coordinator for Service Access Management. Hopefully I'm speaking loud enough. If I'm not, someone just post in the box and I'll speak a little bit louder. But I was asked to speak to you today about our permanent supportive housing program. It's a little bit different. Most of the times you hear permanent supportive housing, you think if you were part of a COC that would be HUD funded, and there's a general outline you have, but this is something that we developed for our county due to unmet needs. So I think it's important that I describe to everyone what our county looks like in my role and my company's role in this before I get into permanent supportive housing, so I'm going to take a minute and do that. So Schuylkill County, where my company in Pottsville is located, is a semi-rural PA county. We're about 90 miles northwest from Philadelphia, 30 miles north from Reading. We're kind of an old cold region with some older housing stock, so there's not as many options for our consumers. We have two major highways running through our county. They kind of intersect in the middle. We have a lot of industrial transportation. But Pottsville, where my office is located, is really the hub of everything. We have a lot of other smaller towns in the area, but Pottsville is where probably 75% of the social services are involved. So think mental health, drug and alcohol, the courthouses in Pottsville, Department of Human Services. So when we have consumers, most of the time, if they need the social services, they either need access to Pottsville, they need to live in Pottsville, or if they're rural outside of Pottsville, they need to be close to a provider. So that's a little bit about how my county looks. So my company, Service Access Management, I'm going to use some broad terms here, so I know there's some newer language, but I'm just going to try to speak in a way that everyone should be able to understand. But we are a behavioral health case management company. So we are composed of a bunch of case managers for different purposes. We probably have the most mental health blended case managers than IDD. We have early intervention case managers. We have some elderly services that have case managers. And then my company kind of branches out and we do some type of trainings for safety. We do some financial services. So we do a little bit of everything. And we basically subcontract these services from the county. So my job at Service Access and Management, I'm the housing coordinator. So for all those case managers, if there's mental health involved, I can sort of conference with them and give them an idea of what should be done, what programs are out there. I do presentations for other providers in the county. I do oversee 5 homeless assistance programs, and I'm part of a homeless veterans program, supportive services for veteran families. So I do a little bit of everything. And I do also supervise one person in the PATH program. So that's a little bit about what I do. That's a little bit about how my county looks. And my goal for this presentation is to sort of outline the permanent supportive housing program, kind of give you an idea of the purpose it serves, and then sort of go over how the process looks and some lessons learned. So, okay. As I mentioned, it's my first time doing this, so I'm going to go ahead with the next slide. Okay. So back in 2011, we have a limited amount of residential services in our area. And back in 2011, we noticed that a handful of individuals were taking up those services, the spots in the residential programs. So the first bullet point, the 4 sub-bullet points are, we have 2 community residential rehabilitations, basically mental health group homes where individuals can reside for 6 to 12 months. Another residential is Danville State Hospital, which is a longer-term residential. We were always over our bed limit. We always had referrals there. Safe Haven, which is a crisis residential. That's a place individuals can go who may not be appropriate for the hospital and need to become stabilized or a step down from the hospital. And then we also had a transitional age youth program that closed a year before this. So we also had another population that was not being served. So we kind of looked at what was going on, you know, what was happening, why were these individuals kind of circulating back into our residential programs, and we wanted to, you know, sort of find housing that was more appropriate for them, that they could, you know, get services they needed and have some landlords that understood what was going on. And we realized that, hey, it really didn't exist, you know, perhaps we should try to create our own. And that's what we did. So our main purpose was to create some sort of safe and permanent housing for these individuals. And we want to get landlords that would be willing to work with us in a program to keep these individuals stably housed so that we could have other individuals utilize these limited residential programs that we have. So the next step was come up with a plan. You know, what should we do? How should we go about it? We ultimately decided to try to get a Health Choices Reinvestment Grant, which is a one-time grant for reinvestment monies. Our plan was to try to find some landlords to invest in some properties that were older and could be brought up to standards to have our consumers rent there. So we did identify 2 landlords. We requested some funding from Health Choices Reinvestment, and the plan was for landlords' incentives, beyond what monies they would put in, the reinvestments would put some monies in the properties as well, and the landlords would rent to our referred consumers for the next 15 to 20 years. So the landlords would retain their properties. They would receive some money, but they would also have to put in a lot of money themselves. We had one landlord that put in over $200,000 into a property, and we had another landlord put in over $100,000 into a property. They did get money, but they also did put in a lot of funds themselves. So I'll get over them more into the rules for the program. But the outcome of the funding was that 2 buildings were renovated and 6 2-bedroom apartments were created, 3 at either building. They were actually some of the nicest apartments in Pottsville. They all had washer dryers. One had on-site, one had in each room, or each apartment, I should say. They had dedicated central air, and part of the proposal was that they would meet Section 8 guidelines, which they easily did. Utilities would be included in rent, and that the rent would be based on HUD fair market values. So to give you another indication of how our county, or what our county looks like, the HUD fair market rent for a one-bedroom in Schuylkill County is $600 with the utilities included. A two-bedroom is around $745 or $760 with utilities included. An added benefit for the landlords was that my company and the county purchased furniture for those units, which serves a dual purpose. One for the landlords is that they have some clean furniture going into the apartments. I know a lot of you, especially in more urban areas, there's lots of pests and bed bugs and such like that. But second of all, our consumers are often coming out of group homes or situations where they were homeless and going into these units, so they don't have the ability to purchase some thousands of dollars in furniture and appliances for these units. So they can go from homeless situation, Danville State Hospital, and into a unit rather easily. So yeah, the main purpose is to get them an affordable living situation and get them everything they need in one shot. So, okay, let me get to the next slide here. So referrals. This is where I come in. I mean, I do buy the furniture as well, but I like to tell people that I oversee tenant selection for this program. So my job is to get referrals from our case managers. I do a lot of presentations for probably the 20 case managers that have consumers that fit into this category or fit into the criteria for this program. I also give presentations to other providers that may have consumers applicable as well, such as children, youth, or another provider. But ultimately, the consumer has to be active with SAM to get a consumer or to get a referral for this program. And something else that was built in the proposal was that any consumer we have has to apply for Section 8. So this is another dual purpose where, for the landlords, we know that any applicant passes a basic Section 8 background. And for the consumer, it reassures them that they will have some type of financial assistance, either when they get the apartment or when they get the apartment or eventually. So my job is to get these referrals, and when an available apartment or when an apartment becomes available, my job is to have what we call committee reviews for each of these referrals. So there's a set of people that I have to invite to these meetings to discuss each consumer and to make sure we get the most appropriate person for the unit. There are a dozen or so individuals that I have to have committee reviews for. For 2 single units at one time, I had to have 18 different committee reviews. So it has to be a fair process. It does take some time, but any referral I have, I do consider. So let me check here. So at the end of committee reviews, the most appropriate candidate is chosen. So I get to recommend someone for a unit, and the landlord has always been accepting of that individual. So the individual is chosen, they get to see the unit, they get to discuss what goes on with the unit, what's in there, and ultimately the landlord offers the consumer directly a lease. So it's not master leasing, it's not something temporary, it's the person is signing their own lease and the apartment is theirs. So I always tell tenants I want them to be there as long as possible, to make their life easier. And if they're doing well, I get less phone calls. There's less things I have to intervene with. So it's something that I really hope the consumers do well. So any consumer that's in this program, they do not have to have other services when they move into the apartment. So they could technically cut all ties with my company, with other services. We don't recommend it, and it hasn't happened yet. But the consumer is free to that unit because they're signing a lease. But we always do recommend what services the consumer should have. We're always available. And the landlords, too, in these units, they work with us very well. If there's a problem, I act as a point of contact. So the landlord knows that they may have 5 or 6 apartments in the program now, and if there's a problem, I'm the person to call, and I'll find the right case manager. Or I can let them know the person's no longer in the program, and I can intervene myself to sort of see if I can help out the individual. Landlords are really open to services going in there. And they understand that it is a program that there may be some things that happen that they may have to talk to me about. So, okay, program expansion. So we started the program in 2011. We started the grant. In 2012, we had 2 buildings and 6 apartments, and since then, we have added 4 more buildings. We've done this through a combination of capital projects with other funding sources with the same general outlines. We do have a target population. There's agreements that the landlords will get some monies that they will rent to our consumers for certain periods of time, and that I'm going to oversee tenant selection, or someone from SAM, if I'm not here, is going to make sure that the person getting that unit meets criteria. So all in total right now, we have 23 beds in 6 buildings. We have 7 2-bedroom units and 9 1-bedroom units. If you'll notice, when we first started the program, we had 6 2-bedroom units. And since then, we've added 1 2-bedroom unit and 9 single-bedroom units. And this is where I'm going to get to a couple lessons learned. Originally, we looked towards 2-bedroom units as a way to have 2 unique individuals go into a unit, and we envision them supporting each other, making sure each other gets the program, working through the recovery process. However, it didn't quite work out. We found there was often some conflicts, and one person wanted to leave, or there were just conflicts. And I'm sure many of you have some similar programs where you've seen different results. But for those who work with housing authorities, if one person moves out of a 2-bedroom, you now have a 1 person in a 2-bedroom unit, and they're overhoused. So at times, I found myself being a matchmaker for the individuals that was left in the unit. So I had to go about seeing, hey, what kind of a roommate would you like? How do you want them to be? Or, who would you work best with? So, and had to find a unique way to get other individuals to match up. And, for a period of time, it was difficult, but we made it work. I guess I'm a pretty good matchmaker in the end. But for the 2 bedrooms, we actually found that part of the target population, which is transition-age youth, worked well with single and double parent households with children. So we ended up putting a lot of families into these 2-bedroom units, and they worked out very well. For the program, if the parent met criteria, their child could be with them in the apartment, and putting a 2-parent household with not much into an apartment full of furniture, and keeping families together, it sort of was something that worked out, and we actually continue to do that. I think most of our 2-bedroom units are family units, so it's just something that was unforeseen, but it worked out that way. We've had some major successes. We've had some individuals go into housing and not do as well. For some successes, we had a young lady who had a lot of drug and alcohol and some mental health issues. She came out of a group home, was put in with a 2-bedroom unit, and actually reunited with her 2 daughters. And she attended the local college while taking care of her 2 daughters. She actually got a degree in psychology while she was in permanent supportive housing for 4+ years, and she actually exited the program as her choice to a location where she could use her degree and, raise her daughters. So that was a very good outcome. We also had, and do currently have, one young lady who utilized our state hospitals multiple times and our CRRs multiple times, and one of her issues was reacting to internal stimuli. We placed her in a permanent supportive housing apartment, and she continued, which is really her baseline behavior of acting out at times. And the police have been called probably 24 times at least over the past 3 years to her apartment. And each time the landlord calls me, we get services involved, and the young lady gets calmed down. And really that's probably the only place that she could reside, getting the authorities involved that many times. So she's a success because there's probably no other apartment or landlord in the area that would reach out to us to keep her there. I guess a little bit more about the program too is that I do have to enter information to HMIS, so I have sort of a system in there, and I create different beds, and I make sure that they're all up to date with the information, ending times, exit times. So that's something I have to do. And the funding for the program, we do not apply for grants each year. This is sort of self-funding. Part of it is that in the grants we have that no consumer will pay more than 30% of their income. So that's anyone with a Section 8 voucher, that's made sure by the voucher. But otherwise, sometimes we have to work with individuals to get them income. Some cash assistance works for some individuals. Some have Social Security income. It's all really a combination of things. And then the county has had to chip in at times to make sure that we do meet the requirements for the program. And yeah, that's basically, a program that we sort of, not built from the ground up, but, we had some help through investments in each program, and we try to, continue expanding the program when we can. And, it's something we had to get creative to make it work in our county. So I think that's it for me. Sherry, I'm going to hand it back to you now. Unless you have questions for me or I can answer something.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, Sean. That was wonderful. Thank you, Pat, as well. I appreciate the wonderful information, and I do have questions for both of you. We've got probably way more questions than we can answer in the time we have left. So I'm going to start with one for you, Sean. What motivated the two landlords to participate? I know that can be sort of tough. So how did you navigate that?
I think we had some community involvement, some landlords. There's one landlord that's a nonprofit, and they do a lot of other projects in the community. And they were sort of approached, and they were open to doing that. I guess we kind of displayed a need to them. Talking through them with what would happen, they were open to it. Yeah, we can't force anyone to do it, but yeah, other than convincing them that it was a worthy project and showing them that this would work out for them, work out for us, and benefit the community. I think that's it.
You. All right. Well, that's good. So I'm going to start with you, Pat, and then if you have something to add, Sean, I would encourage you to jump in after Pat answers. But this is a rather lengthy question, but I think it's a good one. So sometimes we have individuals who we house, but they lose the housing, and then we house them again, and the cycle continues, sometimes over and over. There's a point when landlords are no longer willing to work with the individual, or there are just too many barriers such as evictions, arrests, etc. These folks end up being chronically homeless, living on the street, and even if they have a housing voucher from a particular program, it's hard to get them placed. This is something our community has dealt with. Are there any solutions or creative options that you can suggest? And I think this is an important question because really with Housing First and permanent supportive housing, we're looking at screening people in, not screening people out. So many housing programs are working hard to set rules that make sure that residents are successful, that the people we're serving often have a hard time getting in. So Pat, what would you add to this? You might be on mute.
Do you want me to answer that until Pat gets back on?
I would love it if you would answer that. Thank you for saving me, Sean.
Well, I think that's an extremely good question, and I don't fully know the answer because, yeah, I do work with a lot of individuals where they are really, you know, you work with them for a period of years, and it seems every program you get them into or work with them that they you know, they're chronically homeless. They just don't you know, stick. And I think that's part of why our permanent supportive housing program came along. You know, where we have a landlords willing to work with their consumers, but you know, consumers kind of do find a way to sabotage themselves at times. You know, there's no real answer to that besides, you know, continuing to try other resources in your community, I mean, rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing program, and you know, trying to see what they're missing and get those services involved. You know, I worked with a lot of individuals over the years where I never thought I would, you know, get them permanently housed, and you know, 4 years down the road, for some reason, they decided to work with us and you know, do a little bit of what we asked them. And there's no direct answer to that because we all have different services, but it's just trial and error.
Absolutely. And what we know from the research and from the evidence-based, you know, this model, this evidence-based practice works. A huge percentage of people coming in out of homelessness with serious mental illnesses or co-occurring disorders are still housed after a year. The research is really clear on that. If you provide housing, people begin to get better. So Pat, you lost sound, but now you're back.
A co-moderator has joined the conference.
I will not reread the whole question, but essentially, when somebody was asking, how do you address the fact that some of the folks that we serve with permanent supportive housing or Housing First lose their housing, and you house them again and sometimes again and again until landlords are no longer willing to work with the person, or they've got just so many barriers. So do you have any suggestions for dealing with that? I know that this practice works if you practice to fidelity. So
yes, well, there are several different things I would like to bring up on that situation. One is Housing First and permanent supportive housing work, first of all, if the person wants housing. Sometimes what I see is that we go out and we assume because a person is homeless that their first need is housing. So first of all, we need to find the people who identify housing as a goal. And second of all, we need to make sure when we identify that housing is a goal, that we get their involvement in making the decision about where it is that they want to live. And so we need to give them all of the information that we can possibly give them so that they can make a decision. You know, if you put a person in a place that they don't want to live, it's not going to be that they maintain that housing. We also need to make sure that we're listening to people and we're trying to help them work through, you know, where it is that they want to live. We're giving them all of the options. And some of those options might mean that they have to wait longer, because if they choose a place that is not available right now, but they want that and that's the only place they want to be, then we need to, you know, make sure they understand what's going on and what that means for them. And then I would also say that most times property managers don't work with you because of necessarily the person or the issues that the person has. Property managers want to see you helping and getting in there and being proactive, contacting them before there are problems, asking them if there anything going on. So, you know, I've been a property manager for a long time, and I worked with a program who promised me the moon and the stars and moved in a person. And when it became a time that I needed the services and I needed someone to talk to because the person was struggling, I couldn't get a hold of any staff because that staff person was no longer at the agency. So we need to make sure we're being proactive on our side. We also need to make sure we're listening to the people we serve.
I agree. That's a good point, that the element of choice has to be really emphasized here. So what do you need? If you give people what they tell you they need, they begin to get better. I agree with that. So Sean, this is specifically a question for you. What kind of funding did you come up with to be able to purchase furniture for your units? How did you do that? And I've got a suggestion or two as well when you've finished.
Well, our county provided some funds for that. So
okay.
That's,
I know.
yeah, our county. What was that?
Oh, good. No, I'm sorry. I thought you were finished. Oops.
No, our county provided the funds for that. And yeah, furniture is a little bit expensive, and at times consumers are a little bit hard on the furniture. So we do have to, or I guess Sam or the county has to replace the furniture at times because it is, it does wear out.
Oh, sure.
That might be an
Thank
ongoing
you.
expense if you want to call it, but it's yeah, just something that happens.
So one thing I have seen work really well is if you create a relationship with some of the furniture stores in your communities, the scratch and dent pieces that they can no longer sell as brand new and perfect, they're often willing to donate. If you're a 501c3, it's a tax write-off for them at full value, and it's furniture for you. So I've seen that work over and over, and it works really well. So just a little tip for getting furniture. Pat, do you have anything to add?
No, I think like you said, going after the furniture and asking providers or furniture stores for, you know, furniture they can't sell. Also, in smaller communities, relying on churches, asking churches, you know, that's something concrete they can help with is, you know, providing furniture, but being creative also and putting the word out. You can use Craigslist, I mean, depending on what it is that you need, and asking people to make donations. The thing is just you might need to have somebody manage those donations.
True, absolutely.
I think one of the... Go ahead, sorry.
No,
well, what I was going to
please,
say was I know that we try to get creative sometimes for furniture, but we don't really have any capabilities of moving said furniture. I mean, I'm not a mover myself. One of the suggestions was there is a Penn State school in the area, and at times they do leave some furniture there when they move out. But I guess for my purposes, I always try to get from stores that will deliver, because otherwise I end up having to do some lifting. Not that I don't want to do that, but
well,
it's, you know, above and beyond.
Absolutely. So, Sean, with permanent supportive housing and Housing First, as I said a minute ago, we really are looking to screen people in. These are the hardest people to serve. These are the most vulnerable people in our communities. They've got lots of different issues that make them possibly not the very first choice for a landlord oftentimes. So, and yet that's who this program is designed to serve. So how do you decide which housing applicant is the most qualified? Somebody's asking that. I mean, that it just feels like a little bit of a contradiction with the practice. So can you explain a little more?
I mean, our grant was, made to serve a certain population, so we have to stick to what the grant is. But we always look to serve those that need it the most. So out of our target population, those who have cycled through the community have, been utilized the most residential services to try to get them housed stably so that we can have others use the other residential services. So we do try to target those that need it the most, because that's really what the program's for. I mean, with the landlord situation we're going to put them in, we try to make it the best possible scenario for them to, be successful.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, this is hard. It's nuanced and complicated. So thank you for that. So Pat, I'm going to give you this one. It's sort of an interesting question. So this person is asking, I have a lot of clients calling for wet houses, so if they are using, they will not get kicked out. And actually, and it says, is this something you've seen work elsewhere? Really, I think PSH and Housing First is pretty much, go ahead.
No, Housing First and permanent supportive housing could be technically looked at as wet housing. And let me just say, Housing First does not mean anything goes, but what it does is it's supposed to mean that you have to abide by your lease. So sometimes we have to help people with harm reduction so that, if somebody's using a ton of drugs or alcohol that's affecting their housing, we work with them to help reduce, try to create ways for them to reduce some of that harm so that they can stay housed. Because we know some people can use and stay housed. They can still follow the lease. The most important thing we want to focus on is people maintaining their lease. So we whether they use or not is, not significant. And there are a lot of places that people can use and keep their housing, and it works. The thing is, we need to make sure we're practicing harm reduction, making sure that they're following their lease, that they understand their lease. Some places, you can't be intoxicated or high in public, so people need to realize that and try to stay in their apartment. Some places you can't, smoke drugs in the unit, so people may need to go outside or someplace other than their housing to use their drugs and come back to the house. But just making sure they understand the rules and what they can and cannot do and maintain their housing. I do see some questions on here about the medical respite programs.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to say that for the medical respite program, you can, it doesn't matter if you have a mental health as long as you have a physical health need. The medical respite are really for people with physical health issues. So it doesn't matter if you have a mental health issue. You can still use a medical respite if it's not safe for you to be back on the street with the medical issue.
Thank you. And I actually I have another question for you, Pat. And then Sean, You're welcome to weigh in on this one too. But I think this is probably one you've heard a lot, Pat. If you're not eligible for Section 8, does that mean you're not eligible for PSH housing based on the results of the background check? And I can speak to that a little bit too when you're done if you'd like.
Yeah, no, it basically, and one of the reasons why I put employment in there is because we need to make sure that we're giving people the information they need up front for the housing. And so my what I do is I go through all of the possibilities. I try to put an affordable housing on there if they qualify. If they don't qualify, trying to make sure that they need to know what they can do to get housing. It may be that they have to get a job if they have no income. And that just may be the reality. So, and sometimes I tell people you got to have a job. You don't qualify for any type of assistance, of financial assistance, so you need to have a job. Also, we can also talk about people having roommates. I bring up roommates as an option for people, and sometimes that helps to deal with the cost of housing and the fact that it's hard to find affordable housing. But putting all the options on the table and letting the person decide which route they want to go is how I deal with that.
Thank you. And I would just add that I'm actually the chair of our Board of Commission for our local Public Housing Authority. And I know that the people who are getting the PSH vouchers, we actually reduce the barriers to housing for those folks. So with the exception of things that are written in stone by HUD, which is your methamphetamine producer, or a sexual offender, those are things we cannot change with policy. But we do reduce the barriers to housing for some of the people who are appropriate for the PSH vouchers. So I think part of it is going to come down to local a little bit. Sean, do you have anything to add to that?
We haven't had to run into this yet, luckily. For our permanent supportive housing program, they have to be appropriate for Section 8. Sometimes individuals make too much monies. So we have had one individual, they made too much monies for Section 8. So, they were able to utilize the program, but in that case, they weren't eligible for Section 8 because of their own income.
Great point, because Section 8, that absolutely comes down to income-based. So, in addition to the other couple things. So we've got lots more questions. I'm going to say, Pat, do you want to start with this? But how do you feel community integration fits into Housing First?
I was hoping you would ask that question, because community integration plays a big role in any type of housing. One of the things that we find with people when we go to visit, I've done many site visits and go out to meet people in their housing, and what I hear a lot is that people are lonely. They don't have anybody to talk to. And I think we do a disservice to people by helping them find housing, but don't help them to get back integrated into communities, or maybe it's a new community for them. We need to make sure that we are helping them learn where the resources are in their new community. Where can they go to, where do they go shopping? Where do they go for the library? All of those things play a big role in people being successful in their housing, is making sure they're integrated into the community, making sure they start to build new relationships or friendships, because we've taken them out of being homeless where they had some friends or people knew them, and we're helping them to move into a place that they might not have anybody that they know. They may, if we don't address that, they may want to bring in some of those people from the streets to be with them because they're lonely and they have a place and they'll move everybody in. So I think it's really crucial that we address that up front with people and make sure we pay attention to it.
Sean, do you have anything to add to the community integration conversation?
One thing that stood out to what Pat said was I move a lot of individuals into the permanent supportive housing program in the single units, and I see that they often try to help out their friends that have maybe helped them out for the past couple months, and sometimes they have people in their apartments not supposed to be there, or they get taken advantage of, and it is really important to connect them with community services to continue their recovery. We have a lot of services that go to people's houses and make sure they're getting to appointments, make sure they're, getting the services that they need. And it's important that, they continue those services when, maybe they're going from, I guess in my case, a more restrictive group home or Danville State Hospital into less restrictive. So, we continue to make sure that they are receiving services that they need, and integrating in the community, making those positive friends, making, seeing opportunities for them maybe they haven't seen before, looking into employment if that's what they want to do, and, really empowering them to continue their recovery and to, continue to better themselves.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And I know I've had people tell me when they move into housing, the silence is so loud that it's deafening. I think people have learned to navigate community on the street, and when they get into housing, it can be hard to relearn navigating community. So I think those are both great points from our speakers. We've got time, I think, for one. Do we have time for one more question? I think we're down to 12 seconds, so maybe we don't. We had so many great questions today. I am thrilled with the participation, and we'll look forward to reading the rest of the questions later. Here is contact information for our wonderful speakers.